Well, the Blues have continued to hover around the bottom five of the NHL, and everyone's eyes are pretty firmly on the upcoming draft and offseason, as well as the 2026-27 season. There's still some recent play to react to, and the Blues have also signed collegiate free agent Felix Trudeau to an entry-level contract, and he should factor into the roster conversation as soon as next year. So, how have players been performing lately, and what does it mean for the future? Plus, it's time for our first listener slash viewer Q&A. You submitted your questions about the offseason contracts that the Blues have signed and what this team is going to look like down the road. We're going to talk about all that and more on this episode of Note News. Welcome into another episode of Note News. It is not John and Alec with you as always. It is just John this time. I guess we can't say as always anymore. Alec is traveling right now, so we wish him the best and hope he is having fun. Um, so it's just me today. You're stuck with me. But we're going to have a full episode for you, so don't worry. Um, my name is John. This is Note News. We are a St. Louis Blues podcast, doing episodes every single week, sometimes two a week. So if that's your thing and you love the St. Louis Blues as much as we do, then definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's the best way to support us. You can find us on Spotify and Apple, and then socials on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod. As I mentioned at the top, we have a listener slash viewer Q&A form that is now active, and we're going to talk about the first round of listener slash viewer Q&A questions, or at least I will. And I'm going to link that below because Alec is going to be gone a while. And so if you all continue to have questions, I'm going to continue to come on and answer. And hopefully, fingers crossed, that I will be able to have a special guest join at some point during Alec's absence. So it's not just me rambling here. But all that is to say, the link to the Q&A form is below in Google Forms. So fill that out if you have any questions. If you've submitted before, you can submit again. So there's not a one question limit per customer or anything like that. So if you think of anything else that you want to ask, or a follow-up question to a previous one, it doesn't even have to be about the season. It can be about the off season. It can be about pretty much anything, as you'll see later today. So if you have any questions like that, be sure to submit them, and we'll definitely try to talk about them. Before we get to the Q&A, I did want to take some time and talk about some news and notes that have been around the Blues lately. And I want to start with Felix Trudeau. So this is a collegiate free agent that the Blues just signed. He was undrafted, but they signed him to a 2-year entry-level contract, which will begin next season in 26-27. And he will actually be joining AHL Springfield for the remainder of this season on a PTO contract. So he could figure in to the Thunderbirds and their hopes for the Calder Cup playoffs, which we'll talk about later on. But this is an interesting one, and like I said at the top, he could factor into the roster conversation for the Blues at the NHL level as soon as next year. So, who is this guy? This is, I think, a question on a lot of people's minds. While there's not a ton to get excited about at the NHL level in terms of the results, for the season on the whole, but I think this is an interesting player. As I mentioned, he was undrafted, but he has grown into a pretty solid collegiate player. He's been playing for Sacred Heart University the past 2 seasons. Before that, he was playing for the University of Maine for a couple years. But he's 23 years old. He's a winger, and he is 6'2" and 190 pounds. So not huge, but not a small guy by any means. He had a pretty good season this year, 48 points between 25 goals and 23 assists in only 39 games. I'm pretty sure that he's a top 10 finalist for the Hobey Baker Award, which is, the award given to the best player in college hockey in a given season. And so being a finalist for that, a top 10 finalist is no joke, especially for a guy that went undrafted. So super impressive, great year for Trudeau. The profile on him is is that he is primarily an offensive player. There's not a lot of defensive upside to his game, but the offense is there, and it seems to be pretty real, particularly the playmaking and play driving ability. The way that he's able to um, set his teammates up for success, I think, is the most impressive part of his profile. He's pretty solid in transition, mainly skating it himself rather than making breakout passes. But sometimes he'll make some solid zone entry passes, but prefers to skate it himself. Not the best skater, coincidentally, but nonetheless is solid in transition. His shooting ability isn't too bad. It's pretty solid. There is a bit of upside there, but like I said, it's how he sets up his teammates that's what sets him apart. And so the the playmaking, play driving potential to have a winger like that on your bottom six as soon as next year, at only 23 years old, could be really interesting to see how he develops. This isn't one where I'm thinking personally that the upside is super high. Probably not a guy that's going to be on your top six if everything goes according to plan. Um, but having someone with that upside on the bottom six um, could be really interesting. And I'm pretty sure that, let me find it here. Yes, his cap hit is around $1 million, just over 1 million, and he projects as, like I said, a bottom sixer. So interesting one for sure, and one to keep an eye on, particularly this year in Springfield, once he joins there. What else? Adam Yurachek, let's talk about him. We're going to talk a little bit more about him later as we get to some of the Q&A stuff. But he was named the OHL Defenseman of the Month for March, playing on a really good Brantford Bulldogs team. In the month of March, he had 10 points, between 4 goals and 6 assists in only 8 games and a +9 rating. So Adam Yurachek continues to set himself apart in the Ontario Hockey League for the Brantford Bulldogs. I didn't realize this until I saw the Blues press release, but he set a Brantford franchise record for most goals in a single season by a defenseman. So this is a pretty good Brantford team. I think I think they have the best record in the OHL this season. They clinched that right, or I guess that title for the regular season this year, best record. And Adam Yurachek is a big reason why. Obviously, having a great season. I believe the regular season is now over for the OHL, and he had 59 points in 55 games, and it's pretty balanced offense as well. He's scored 19 goals. He tacked on 40 assists, and it had a +31 rating. So Adam Yurachek, man, he continues to build on his excellent season that he's having. Obviously, won the silver medal at the World Juniors this year, and is now gonna be competing in the playoffs in the OHL, for a really good Brantford team. So yeah, we could see Adam Yurachek up in St. Louis as soon as next season, which I think is super exciting. And this is ties into a listener question. So I'll leave it there on Adam Yurachek, but just wanted to shout him out, OHL Defenseman of the Month. It's a good league with a lot of good defensemen in it, and so continues to have a great season. Okay, getting to the Blues a little bit. I did want to talk about their recent results, because last time we came on for an episode, I believe was March 14th, and the Blues have played 4 games since then. And so starting with the first of those 4 games, I'm pulling it up now, was the Winnipeg game, I believe. Yes, in Winnipeg against the Jets, they lost 3-2, obviously. But the thing I wanted to talk about with some of their recent results is, they're playing competitive games. It's not like this is not the same, um, you know, Blues team that we were seeing at the beginning of the year. This team is pretty competitive, and the roster has been um, a little bit stripped to the point where you'd be surprised if they looked better than win two, lose two, that type of result, that type of stretch. You'd be surprised if you saw that. Um, but game to game, I think they're a lot more competitive, and they're not like getting blown out or anything like that. So that's good when you are asking for your next young core to step up and take over a team, to have them do so and compete, um, is a great sign. So the fact that the games are competitive is great. The other thing I wanted to talk about and call attention to was just like when you look at the stat sheets for each of these games and the scoring summaries for each of these games, the names that you're seeing for each of the Blues goals is just so much fun. So the Jets game, you see Devo score his 10th of the season, assisted by Jonathan Berggren, and then you've got Dylan Holloway scored within the final minute. That one was assisted by Logan Mailloux and Jimmy Snuggerud. So that's really fun. We have talked about this top line of Holloway, Thomas, Snuggerud. It's been so good. It's crazy. It's just the number of, like, the percentage of points that the Blues have since this top line has been playing together. The percentage of points held by that top line is insane. I don't have it calculated out, but all you have to do is scroll through and look at the results. The next game was against the Calgary Flames on the road. The Blues' only goal in regulation was Dylan Holloway, assisted by, guess who? Jimmy Snuggerud and Robert Thomas. So there's that top line buzzing again. They lost that one in the shootout. So they continue to struggle there. But, you know, it's okay. It's okay for the ethical tank. Don't worry. The next game was a win over Vancouver. You would hope that they would be able to beat Vancouver no matter how badly the season is going. This is like a historically bad season for the Canucks, but they beat them 3-1. First goal scored by Pius Suter, assisted by Thomas and Holloway, that top line. Second goal scored by Buchnevich, assisted by Broberg and Mailloux. And then the third goal was an empty netter, but Logan Mailloux got an assist on that one as Jordan Kyrou put it away. And then last night against the Washington Capitals, the Blues shut them out. Joel Hofer gets his sixth shutout of the season, which trails only Ilya Sorokin for most in the league. And Ilya Sorokin's going to win the Vezina this year. I think that's probably what's going to happen. It's probably between him and Vasilevsky, if I had to say. But I think it's Sorokin's to lose right now. He's having a historic season. He's had 7 shutouts this year. Joel Hofer's had 6. So he is. I was texting a little bit with Alec and some others, but like when Joel Hofer is on, he is on. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about Hofer once we get to some listener questions. But great game from Hof. The goals scored by the Blues, we had, guess who? Jimmy Snuggerud continues to be hot. Scored the first one, assisted by Logan Mailloux and Philip Broberg. And then you have the second one, Otto Stenberg, assisted by Dvorsky and Berggren. There's that third line of the youngsters getting in on that one. That was like that tic-tac-toe goal. That was a ton of fun to watch. Really, really well done by them. And then the Jordan Kyrou empty netter again. This game, the results were there. There was some really solid scoring, but it was also the intangibles that I really liked about this game. They are playing against a Washington Capitals team that is having a disappointing season. They had higher expectations for themselves after, winning the Eastern Conference regular season last year. Um, and this is a frustrated team, and it's a team that has Tom Wilson on it, a guy with a reputation for being tough and all that. And he was just giving it to Jimmy Snuggerud early in this one. Um, and to be honest, don't really know why, other than maybe just Jimmy Snuggerud's good, and he was threatening, um, and was up close and personal with the goalie, which is kind of his bag a little bit. Um, but when Jimmy Snuggerud, was being pushed around by Tom Wilson and some others, there was a really great and really considerable team response. Particularly, I'm pleased with what we saw out of Robert Thomas, a guy whose leadership capabilities have been um, you know in question for the past couple of years. This and are especially important right now in the absence of Braden Shen and with the next captain still to be named. So particularly to have Robert Thomas step up, and get a roughing penalty. I think he got for that one. To have that happen, I think is a good sign and really made me happy. But how about Otto Stenberg and the fighting penalty? Ryan Leonard took exception to the hit that Stenberg laid on him, but Stenberg took a fighting penalty, scored a goal later, and almost got the Gordie Howe hat trick. But I think he got first star of the game in that one. So the point is, I think we're seeing flashes and seeing signs of you know the next phase, the next core, not just in how um, they are filling up the stat sheet, which they are, and it's young guys every night, but also with how um, like I said, the intangibles. There's this old adage, and if anyone listens to 32 Thoughts or knows of Elliot Friedman, you'll be familiar with this one. But you know, are you a team or are you a club? And I think what the Blues showed last night was more on the side of a team, and that's a good thing and a great sign. Um, so loved seeing that result. The other guy that I want to talk about was Logan Mailloux. I read the stats um, from the past four games, and if you were listening closely, you would know that Mailloux figured in on a lot of the points um, in those four games, but it goes back further than that. Um, I am reading this. This is a tweet from Gateway Grinders. Um, so credit to them. So Logan Mailloux, his stats since the Olympic break: in 13 games, he's had 2 goals, 4 assists. He is a +6, and his average time on ice is 22 and a half minutes. And he's been playing on the top pair alongside Philip Broberg. Um, so as bad as the early results were for Logan Mailloux this year, um, I think I still have a lot of hope and see a lot of upside there. I think the confidence that he has gained over the course of the season is a huge thing. But also, you know, paired with that is the confidence that the Blues are showing in him, which I think could be huge for his development. Playing him on the top pair, playing him alongside the greatest defenseman in the league, in Philip Broberg, um, which I say tongue in cheek for anyone that isn't as familiar with my love of Philip Broberg. Um, but how about Logan Mailloux? File that. I think it is still early, but I think we can file the reception to the Logan Mailloux trade. Like, what I'm trying to say is the early reaction to Logan Mailloux was an overreaction. It was bad. It was bad at the beginning of the season, and for a long stretch of the season. But it's been bad for the Blues. Everyone's been bad on this team, with the exception of, you know, I mean, Philip Broberg, to be honest, and Jimmy Snuggerud maybe. I think everyone has been bad for stretches. Um, but the point is, like, Logan Mailloux is really putting something together and showing flashes and signs of, maybe not even flashes at this point. He's showing, considerable evidence of why the Blues made this trade in the first place. I think for better or for worse, he's going to be compared to Zach Bolduc for a long time. And so, you can compare the points that each of the players are getting over certain stretches and say, this indicates that this team won the trade. I think it's way more nuanced than that. I think most people think it's way more nuanced than that. But long story short is, how about Logan Mailloux? He's really putting something together, and is looking good. I think he is looking like he has that top four upside that we hoped he would have when the Blues made this trade last summer. So definitely want to monitor and keep teasing it. But we are also going to talk about him in the listener Q&A, which we will go ahead and get to right now, actually. So we are at the 21-minute mark, and so we're going to get to the listener Q&A. As I mentioned at the top, we are going to keep this Q&A form open. We're hoping that this is going to be a thing we can revisit, even after Alec returns. Something maybe we can discuss, he and I together on the podcast. So we're just going to leave it open. It's linked below. I'll link it, if I can, on the video itself. It's linked below on YouTube. It's linked in the show description on Spotify and Apple. We've also posted links to it on our socials, so be sure to fill it out with whatever questions you have. I'm going to answer a few here in a minute, and you'll kind of see people are asking all kinds of stuff. So really, there is no nothing's really out of bounds for this. So we are going to answer what we can, and if you have any questions, be sure to fill that out. If you've already asked a question and want to follow up or want to ask another question, fill it out however often you want to. We're not limiting this. So let me get our questions pulled up. All right, so the first questions that I want to get to, I'm going to lump together. I think they form, they're each part of a larger discussion that we can have. So I'm gonna list all of them first, and then sort of talk about all of them. So the first one is from Jack D. What do you think the Blues will do in the offseason? Who will we trade? Jack also asks, what do you think the future of the Blues defensive core is? Both great questions. Jacob also asked, was the Cam Fowler extension a mistake or an overpay? I think we can talk about all of these together. So to talk about the first one with the Blues offseason, I think I'll just want to say up front, this hinges in a big way on how the draft lottery goes for them. So, if things go to plan and they get a top 5 pick, I think we could see them being a little less aggressive on the trade market, because I think the top 10 of this first round is deep enough to where, picking anywhere in the top 5, you're probably getting a really solid player that's going to help you sooner rather than later. There isn't like the Macklin Celebrini type available in this draft, but the top is deeper than most drafts. So all that is to say, if they can get that pick, that lottery pick, towards the top, I think they're a little less aggressive. But if they do get, a little bit screwed over by the draft lottery, I think we could see a bigger trade. And so first, I'm just gonna assume that they get the draft situation that they want, right? They get a top 5 pick. I think the offseason, you probably look at, and I think, there's a bigger discussion here to be had about the direction of the Blues. I think as fans, we don't have as good an idea sitting here today as we will by the time this upcoming season starts. I think by the time we get to training camp for the 26-27 season, we're going to know what the next several years of Blues hockey is going to look like, hopefully. At least the front office will signal to us what they think it's going to look like, right? So depending on how they approach this offseason, We could be looking at a retool on the fly, or we could be looking at an extended rebuild. So they get the draft pick that they want. That speeds up that process. That inches you, I think, a little bit closer to retool on the fly, because I think there is enough solid young talent in the system currently to where you insert that premier prospect into it. Plus, you're calling up Carbonneau, you're calling up Juracek. Um, I think that is a really intriguing young team. So first, let's assume that they get the draft pick that they want. I kind of expect them to, you had the Braden Shen and Justin Falk trades in the middle of the season. Those kind of felt like one Justin Falk, two Braden Shen. The the two trades that kind of had to happen first for this team to move on and get to the next stage. I think the next up on that list is probably Jordan Binnington. I kind of expect this to happen no matter what happens. No matter how the draft lottery goes, if they get a great pick or if they don't. I kind of expect Jordan Binnington to be playing somewhere else by the fall, and I think that that's a disappointing result as a Blues fan. I love Jordan Binnington, and he's going to have a statue someday outside Enterprise Center, and it's a tough situation to be in, obviously, but I think the writing's on the wall a little bit with this one. I think you have just looking at Jordan Binnington himself, right? Had a down year, but I think the good goalie is still in there. We saw that at the Olympics. I think there is still going to be interest in a guy like Jordan Binnington around the league, who look at his Olympic performance. He kind of reaffirmed that big game winner reputation that he's had for a while now. So I think there are a lot of teams out there who would look at that and find interest in that, and maybe trade for Jordan Binnington as that finishing piece. I think it also depends. The Jordan Binnington market does depend on how the playoffs go this year. If you have a team like the Edmonton Oilers who get bit by goaltending in the playoffs again, maybe they just say screw it and they go and get Jordan Binnington. I think you could wonder the same thing about the Carolina Hurricanes, right? It's felt like between Kochetkov and Anderson, they have not been able to put it together, largely because their goaltending tends to struggle the further in they get to the playoffs. Well, why not trade for a guy who seemingly only gets better as the pressure gets amped up? So I think he could really thrive in that defensively sound system. So, a couple options there. That is to say, I think the interest is out there for Jordan Binnington, right? I think Jordan Binnington, as a competitor and the fiery guy that he is, probably wants to be playing in a better situation than than to finish out his current contract on a team that doesn't really expect to be super competitive. So I think the interest is there outside. I think the interest is there maybe to move for Jordan Binnington. And then for the Blues, look at Joel Hofer. Look at what he's doing. He is ready to be the starter. He is the starter right now. Joel Hofer is the starter right now. He is the better goalie this year, and has been for a while this year. They were both struggling early on, but Joel Hofer has figured it out. Like this second half of the season, and maybe you could look back even a little further. He has figured it out and looks starter ready. So why not go ahead and pass the torch, give him the net, and let him sort of establish himself as the next guy. So I think there's interest. There would probably be interest all the way around for Jordan Binnington to be traded. I think that happens. The other ones that I'm looking at, we can have the Cam Fowler discussion. So let me pull up the exact details of his contract. I know it was a 3-year deal that they signed last offseason. I just want to start off by saying, if I remember correctly, I think Jacob, who has been a viewer for a while, was skeptical of the contract when it was signed. Jacob, feel free to comment and correct me if that's not the case. Um, but Cam Fowler, I just want to start by saying I don't think this was a mistake. I don't think. Well, okay, let me back up. I don't think this was an overpay. I think you could argue maybe it was a mistake in the sense that the Blues clearly weren't actually ready um, to sort of put that finishing touch on with a guy like Cam Fowler. But at $6.1 million, only over 3 years, you know, with where the cap is going and where contracts in this league are going, like that feels like fair value for Cam Fowler. I think if he um, were to go to free agency this offseason, um, I don't know that he is signing for much less than that, you know? Um, and let's see, he does have a no trade clause for the next 2 seasons and then a modified no trade on this, let's see, in January 2029, he has a modified no trade that becomes a 15 team no trade. So just thinking about Cam Fowler, um, the Blues trade for him in the middle of the season last year, and their season turns around. It just felt like he slotted in on the top pair alongside Colton Parayko, and that bumped everyone else down to where they needed to be. It bumped, you know, I mean, Nick Leddy was out for a while and had a rocky time last season. But you had Broberg and Falk playing on that second pair and found that chemistry that they were a great pairing. And then you had Suter and Tucker on that third pair for a lot of the year, and that sort of felt like where they needed to be playing. And obviously, with injuries and things like that, players shuffled around. Ryan Suter early on was taking over. If you remember, Ryan Suter was playing those top pair minutes when Nick Leddy was out. So, you pull up your third liner, no matter how experienced he is, or your third pair guy, excuse me, no matter how experienced he is, it kind of he's not a top pair defenseman, and so you trade for Cam Fowler, that slots everyone back down where they're supposed to be, levels things out. That top pair of Cam Fowler and Colton Parayko was elite. Maybe that's a little bit of an overstatement, but they were so good at generating offense. Cam Fowler with the assists, Colton Parayko with the goals last year. That pair was clicking and working. And then you get to the playoffs, and he has a historic playoff run in the first round. I can't remember how many points it was exactly, but it was crazy. Wasn't it like, I'm going to pull it up. Anyways, I think he was deserving of an extension, and, if he doesn't sign it, he wouldn't be a UFA until this summer, and with the season he's had, maybe he doesn't earn quite the contract that he would have had. Maybe he doesn't earn quite the contract that he signed at 6.1 million over 3 years, but I don't think it's far off. Yes, in 7 games he had 10 points in that first round last year. So just a crazy performance by Cam Fowler. And from the Blues' perspective, going into this season, they thought they would be competitive. I think we all did. And you look at Cam Fowler as for the remainder of the contract, a top 4 guy. And maybe he slots back down to the second pair once Broberg steps up, which has functionally happened now, although Fowler has also been playing some third pair minutes at times to sort of balance out the experience with the rookie and young players. Anyways, I think from the Blues' perspective, you were looking to move on from Justin Falk probably, unless this season was just, going gangbusters. And having Cam Fowler as that backup, I don't think was a huge issue. So I don't think it was an overpay. I guess you could argue maybe it was a mistake in the sense that they weren't where they thought they would be, and so now you're looking at this contract and wondering, can we keep this around for the remainder of can we keep him around for the remainder of this contract? I think that's a valid question. And so this offseason, if I were the Blues, um, I would probably be looking um, to move off of it. Probably easier said than done. As I mentioned, he does have a full no trade. But this sort of dovetails into Jack's question, which what do you think the future of the Blues defensive core is? Um, I think you're probably calling up Juracek next year, and I think he's probably ready to take on NHL minutes, and so maybe Cam Fowler is the odd man out. So maybe you could find a fit for Cam Fowler elsewhere. So I feel like he is probably next up on the list. Um, you have your guys like Suter that could be traded. Maybe that happens, but maybe not. Maybe you opt to keep that center depth. Um, so that's a good question. So in short, to answer Jacob's question, I don't think it was an overpay. Maybe in the sense of 3 years. I think I remember feeling like 3 years was a little long. Um, so I would have preferred a 2-year contract, but realistically, defensemen of Cam Fowler's reputation and capability are probably like he probably would have fetched a very similar contract on the open market. Um, so maybe you trade him, but maybe it's a little more difficult given the no trade clauses, which is a separate discussion. I'm not critical of personally not very critical of Doug Armstrong for handing out no trade clauses um, in most cases. What else? Getting back to Jack's question of what do you think the Blues will do this offseason? Who will we trade? I mentioned Bennington. I mentioned Fowler. Maybe that happens. I mentioned Suter. Maybe that happens, although I don't know if I see it with Braden Shen out. I think Suter has been playing. I mean, he's been the Swiss Army knife. He's playing everywhere. So I wonder if they decide to hold on to that. The others that I'm thinking about. So let's talk about the bigger names, and let's assume that the Blues don't get the draft pick that they want, right? I think in that case, we could see a big name moved by draft day or on draft day. Um, the big names I'm looking at, I don't think that I see Robert Thomas getting traded. Um, I don't know that anyone's going to meet the asking price. Maybe they do, but even then, I don't know if the Blues are going to get that one done. Um, I hope that they don't. I hope they hold on to Robert Thomas. But the other big ones that we've heard a lot about are Jordan Kyrou and Colton Parayko. So I wonder if they don't get that top 5 pick that they want, depending on which teams are up there in that good draft slot, do they trade Jordan Kyrou and package him together with something else to get that pick? I think we could see something like that. We saw them try to trade Colton Parayko. This is sort of the elephant in the room. They tried to trade Colton Parayko for Ratty Murtka and a first, which would have kind of been a dream return for a guy like Parayko. He turned it down, um, partly because he loves St. Louis and um, loves playing for the Blues. But I think the other big thing was it was sort of sprung on him. He didn't have a lot of time to make his decision. So during the summer, depending on the destination, maybe he has more time to think about it and make that decision. And maybe we see him okay a trade somewhere. So I don't know that I see the Blues blowing it up and trading all these players, but maybe they get 2 or 3 of these trades done. I'm looking at Jordan Bennington, sort of the top of my list, as painful as that is to say. And then I'm looking at one of Kyrou or Parayko. I think we have seen and heard Kyrou's name out there enough, and for a while, I I think it was just I don't know that there was a lot of like fire there. I think it was a lot of just smoke. But now I wonder. I do think that just given the how long it has lasted and how much his name keeps popping up, And as rumors and reports continue to surface around the Jordan Kyrou rumors, the Jordan Kyrou trade market, I think maybe we do see that one coming. Um, but I don't think they do. I don't think they do both. I think they're kind of looking to make one big trade, um, and I think it's probably between Kyrou and Pareko in my mind. They I think were floating Kyrou to the New York Islanders in exchange for Noah Dobson last summer. I think that Jordan Kyrou um, was I think it has come out that he was sort of the impetus of the Logan Mailloux deal, and there was like a bigger deal being discussed that would have sent Kyrou to Montreal, um, but they sort of pivoted and made that smaller Beaulieu for Mailloux trade. So um, I do wonder if that one is coming. I think Jordan Kyrou of like the Blues core, if your core is like Thomas, Pareko, and I'm sort of talking about the veteran guys and not so much the young guys, but if your core is like Thomas, Pareko, and Kyrou, say, let's just say that those are sort of like the big guys, again, not counting the young guys. Of those three, I think Jordan Kyrou is probably the most dispensable just because you have Dylan Holloway, you have Justin Carbonneau coming, you have Otto Stenberg, um, and these wingers that are coming, and I think maybe the writing is on the wall with that one too. So again, Bennington top of the list, one of Kyrou or Pareko. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw one of those happen this summer, and then maybe another smaller move like a Fowler trade, or even like a Drouin trade. Maybe they try to move on from that contract, but anyways, hope that answers some of your questions, Jack. The other question that Jack had was, what do you think the future of the Blues defensive core is? Which is a really fun one. I think that this Broberg Jiricek pairing is going to feed families for so long. This is going to be so much fun to watch if and when it happens. So I think Jiricek gets called up at some point next year. If not out of training camp, then maybe we see a call up a little bit into the season, like we saw with Devo. Um, I think with the season he's had, he's proven that he is on track and probably ready to make the jump pretty soon. So I do wonder if we see that happen, particularly if they do trade Colton Pareko or Kim Fowler. So Broberg Jiricek up on the top pair, I think could be a lot of fun for a long time. I think a Lindstein Mailloux second pairing. Um, you know, this isn't to say that these are the players that are going to be paired together. I'm just sort of ranking them by skill, I guess. But Lindstein and Mailloux, I think, are probably um, your. I think they're probably solid middle pair guys in their prime, and I think you know I think those are the four that come to mind. Plus, depends on whatever the Blues get done in the draft, but maybe we see them take a defenseman early on, and maybe this conversation uh, can expand to include whoever that may be. I think there's some interesting things happening with the Blues picks. They obviously have their own first round pick, but they also have Detroit's, and Detroit is looking like they might miss the playoffs. And so if they do, the Blues could have two top 16 picks, which would be huge. So maybe they are able to supplement their defensive core, but I'm really excited about a potential Broberg Jiricek pairing. I think that would be so much fun. Okay, long-winded answers to short questions. Okay, one quick fun one from Peter G, and then there's a couple good questions later on. But one quick fun one from Peter G, who asks, if you could add one former Blue to the current roster, who would increase their competitiveness the most? And the stipulation is whatever percentage of cap hit they had is translated into today's money. So the roster must remain cap compliant. And if they didn't play in the cap era, assume whatever their contract is would cost a reasonable amount in today's league. So Peter G gave me quite the task here. Thank you so much, Peter G. So this one took some math, and I just want to say, first off, I am assuming that the Blues are signing this player, this former Blue, in the offseason. So they only have about 2% of the cap remaining for this season, and so I thought it would be more fun looking forward because there's not a lot you can do with 2%, which is like less than $2 million. So looking forward, next year they currently have 20.9% remaining. They had 20.9% of cap space remaining. I believe the salary cap next year is 104 million, and so they've got 20.9 remaining. There's a lot you can do with that 20.9, Peter G. Okay, so in terms of who would increase their competitiveness the most, I guess you would ask, what do the Blues need the most, right? And so I've got 4 answers for you that could all be signed. So the first one is the only player of the 4 that I'm talking about here, who played in the cap era, or who played for the Blues in the cap era, and that's Alex Pietrangelo. So what I did with Petro was use the percentage of the cap for Petro that from when he signed his contract, and I think it was in 2013 that he signed that. I think it was a $6.5 million cap hit, and the percentage of the cap back then would equate to a cap hit today of 10 million, and so they could fit that in. All right, so Alex Pietrangelo, I think having him, and you know, I think according to Peter G's question, it is. I'm assuming that it is that player at that time and not today. But you sign 2010's Alex Pietrangelo to this team, and things look a lot different, I think. As does the team if you sign Al MacInnis, another defenseman. I'm saying 98 Al MacInnis. So the next 3 are not cap era players. So what I did for them was I equated their how their salary compared to the average salary in that time to today. So the average salary today is about 3.5 million. So Al MacInnis in 98, his contract, according to that methodology, would be about 13.5 million today. So you could fit that. You could fit that in. I think if you look at pure cap space, the Blues have, I'm pulling it up now, they have projected cap space next year of, excuse me, I think it's going to be around like 20 million or something like that, given the percentage. Anyways, so I'm having trouble pulling it up. Anyways, you could fit 98 Al MacInnis in. You could also fit in 1990 Brett Hull, who would be making around 14 million today. You could also fit in 1997 Wayne Gretzky, who would only be making around 3.4 million in today's dollars. So you can pretty much have whoever you want, Peter G. Take your pick, and it just comes down to who do you think would help this team the most. I'm between. I feel like it's Brett Hull. I feel like they need that star that we talk about so much, that scoring star, and putting him next to Robert Thomas. Oh my God, that would be awesome. Okay, the last set of questions that I want to get to are from Joe P, who first asks about examples of teams that have lost intentionally to improve their draft pick. So this is part of a bigger discussion that a lot of Blues fans are having about tanking versus not tanking. It's a discussion Alec and I have had on here a few times, and it's one where I go back and forth on kind of what I want to happen. Um, so Joe P also says in his question that it seems unrealistic that the team itself is going to try to tank to improve their draft pick. And I feel like this is maybe a misconception that a lot of people have, and not everyone, but I think, you look at the team and say, well, they're bad. Why wouldn't they want to lose so they can improve their draft stock? Like that it does achieve that. Losing does achieve an improvement in your odds in the draft lottery. But I asked this question to Alec on our last episode. Like, do you really want a team that would go out there and try to lose? Like tanking doesn't happen on the ice at the player team level. Players aren't going to go out there and tank. They are not going to go out there and try to lose because their livelihoods are at stake, their reputations are at stake, and when they're up for new contracts, people are going to point to their performance, and so same with coaching staffs, right? And so no, the coach and the players are not going to go out there and try to lose on purpose. That doesn't happen. They're going to obviously go out there and try to win. That's just how they're wired. Um, where the tanking does happen is in the front office at the GM level when they don't set up the team on the ice to succeed. And there is evidence of this. Trading away, tearing it down, full scale rebuild, and ensuring based on the talent on the roster that the team will lose. Um, that does happen. There is evidence of that. The three teams that I want to talk about briefly are, I'll say, the Montreal Canadiens, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Detroit Red Wings. So I think three teams that kind of fill out the tank, rebuild range of outcomes. So first you've got Montreal, and they haven't won anything, and so maybe it's premature to call what they have done in the past few years a success. But they're competitive again. They are going to make the playoffs again this year, and they look good, and they're young, right? They have sort of done, I think, the ideal like rebuild, retool on the fly, where they have sort of flooded the system with a lot of young talent. That's going to stick around for a while. You've got Nick Suzuki, who's sort of your Robert Thomas type, very similar players as your top line center. You've got Cole Caulfield, you've got Uri Slavkovsky, you've got, who am I missing? There's tons of guys up there. Ivan Demidov, you've got Lane Hudson, you've got Jacob Fowler. Their young goalie who's looking good. A lot of young players who look like the future of that team. That was accomplished through a sort of rebuild on the fly, where they racked up a lot of draft picks, and they were able to get this team built. So that's what it looks like when it goes well, but it's also what it looks like when you get a little bit lucky. The other end of that spectrum, you look at Chicago, the Chicago Blackhawks. Like they tore it down after the 2010s era. They tore it down and they tried to lose. They tried to tank repeatedly, and what that has gotten them is Connor Bedard, Anton Frundell, or no, I mean, is it Anton Frundell? I mix up the Frundells, but they have gotten a lot of early first round picks. Artem Levshinov was another one from the I think 2024 draft, and so who is the front? Yeah, it is Anton Frundell. They got the picks. They drafted the young players. You also have Frank Nazar and some others. But it kind of feels like they are stuck in neutral, or the tires are spinning a little bit, and they don't really have anything to show for it yet. And maybe it's too soon, but this is it's so far evidence of a rebuild, of what a rebuild can be, which is just really difficult to climb out of. The other end of that is the Detroit Red Wings, who have been doing the Yzer plan for forever, and have been rebuilt. I think, what is it? 9 years that they have missed the playoffs. Is the second longest streak, and probably by the end of the season, if they miss the playoffs, will be the longest streak because Buffalo's looking like they're going to make it and end their drought. Um, and Detroit is just, it feels like every year, in the past like 3 seasons, they get up towards the top of the hill that is making the playoffs, and right as they're about to crest over that hill, they run out of gas or whatever, the engine goes dead, and they slide in the standings, and so they have just not been able. The talent is there, and it's not just young players there anymore. You've got Dylan Larkin, you've got um, you know. Cam Talbot and John Gibson are their goalies. Those aren't young goalies by any means. Um, and Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider, players that are looking good, and that the type of players that you need to rebuild in a lot of cases, particularly with Moritz Seider. But it hasn't worked yet, and it just has. It feels like when is that train going to pull into the station? I don't know. So um, if you do go into like a rebuild and a tank and you try to lose intentionally, it does happen. There's evidence of it, but the evidence of it working is a little more hit or miss. A lot has to go right. Okay, Joe also asks, what about Steve Ott, who went to Springfield? What was you know wasn't the idea for him to gain experience to improve his future coaching opportunities? How is that working out? It's working out pretty well. So I did some back of the envelope math, literally back of the envelope math. And before Steve Ott took over as head coach of AHL Springfield, in 37 games, they had a 13, 18, and 6 record, or I guess 13, 18, 4, and 2 record. In the AHL, they in the standings, or I guess in the standings, they sort of split out overtime losses and shootout losses into separate categories. So that's a winning percentage of about 43% before Steve Ott took over. Since he took over, they have played 30 games. They've gone 12, 10, 6, and 2. And that's not a winning percentage, a points percentage of 533, or of just over 53%. So they went from around 43% points percentage to a 53% points percentage since he took over. And there are 11 games left, and they're only 2 points out of the Calder Cup playoffs. So they're behind two teams. They've got 58 points. The two teams ahead of them each have 60. It's the Lehigh Valley Phantoms and the Bridgeport Islanders. So they could make the playoffs. I believe when he took over, they were last in their division, in the Atlantic division of the AHL. And now they're looking like they could make the playoffs. With 11 games left, it's well within the realm of possibility. They're only 2 points out. So a 533 winning percentage, points percentage, excuse me, since he took over is no small thing. So that, I would say that's going well. And there was evidence of it working on a player-to-player basis down in Springfield. I think Theo Lindstein really got going once Steve Ott took over, and now has obviously been called up to St. Louis. So that's exciting. I would be surprised if Steve Ott remained in the Blues system. Or I guess I should say, I would be surprised if he ever became the head coach of the St. Louis Blues or ever returned as an assistant coach. I think he wants to be a head coach. When Drew Bannister was hired after Craig Berube, I think Steve Ott was, he was in that conversation. Same deal after Drew Bannister was or I guess Drew Bannister was let go because Jim Montgomery became available. But Steve Ott was in the conversation before Drew Bannister was named head coach, after he was the interim head coach, right? And so Steve Ott wants to be a head coach, and he can't be playing second fiddle to Jim Montgomery. He's for the remainder of his coaching career. So he obviously wants to be a head coach, and I would be surprised if he didn't leave to accept a role somewhere. as a head coach, and maybe we see him stay in Springfield next season and get a full season body of work, and maybe try to parlay that into something bigger with another team later. But Jim Montgomery was signed to a 5-year deal, and it's going to be a long time before he would be able to take over from that unless Jim Montgomery is fired, which I don't think is happening. So, yes, the idea was for him to gain that experience and improve his future opportunities. I think those opportunities are going to come elsewhere. Okay, the last question from Joe, and the last question that we'll talk about today is a bit of a fun one. How about matching Blues players with players from? I guess I should say, before we get to this one, I did want to give the plugs one more time. So if you have a question that you want me to address on a future episode, or once Alec comes back, you want us both to address, then submit it. Question and answer form is linked in the show notes, whether on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. You can subscribe and follow, rate, review on all those platforms. We'd appreciate it if you would. And we're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod as well. We would love if you would follow us. Okay, last question from Joe. Bit of a fun one. How about matching Blues players with players from AFC Richmond, from Ted Lasso? Who is Jamie Tart? Who is Danny Rojas? Who is Roy Kent? So this one's fun and not easy, I would say. So I kind of feel like the Jamie Tart the Jamie Tart like profile kind of aligns with Jordan Kyrou. Maybe not in terms of personality. I don't mean that as a slight to Jordan Kyrou. I'm just thinking about like about the like the skiller reputation. I feel like Jamie Tart is the skiller of the team, and Jordan Kyrou kind of fits that. Roy Kent is a tough one. Maybe that would have been Braden Shen, just as like there's the captain factor there. So with him gone, I don't know who takes it. But you're looking for a leader who's maybe grouchy and stony. I don't know, maybe Jordan Binnington, because he's got the fieriness. Danny Rojas, who instead of football is life would be hockey is life. Maybe Jimmy Snuggerud, maybe Dylan Holloway. I could use some help with this one for any listeners or viewers out there. If you have any thoughts on this one, I do have a good one. I think Sam Obisanya is Colton Parayko. They're just too wholesome, both so wholesome. I think you could say Zero is Hofer. There's the goalie thing, and then the last one I'll say is Zaba is Gretzky for that half a season that he played in St. Louis. The greatest player in the world coming to play for half a season. I'll say Wayne Gretzky in '97. Okay, I think that's going to do it for our first Q&A and for my first solo episode. I hope I did all right. Went a lot longer than I thought it would, talking by myself. So appreciate everyone for listening and watching me ramble for about an hour. I will be back either with or without someone with me, whether it's Alec or a special guest. Hopefully we'll have someone back on soon so this can become conversational again. But if not, I will definitely be back at some point to maybe do a quicker episode next time. But definitely continue to submit questions. We want to hear from you. Want to know what questions you have. So fill out that form out. Follow, rate, and review on Spotify and Apple. Subscribe on YouTube. That's the best way to help us out. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about some of these questions and if you have different answers. Like this video. Follow us on socials as well, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod, where we post a lot of other great stuff. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time. And let's go Blues.